Before the rain had started, before the streetlights buzzed to life along the broken curb, a woman standing at the counter of a corner bodega held out a $5 bill with a hand that would not stop shaking. And the man behind her, the one with the heavy coat and the cold mouth, and the reputation that made grown men cross the street, reached over her shoulder and plucked the wallet from her fingers the way you might take a toy from a child. He did it smiling. His crew laughed. She did not turn around. She stood perfectly still, trained by years of something terrible to make herself as small as possible when danger was close. He opened the wallet expecting cash, cards, maybe something worth mocking. But what he found inside made the laughter die in his throat. It was a photograph. A small girl in a hospital gown, bald, smiling, holding up two fingers in a peace sign. And behind the photograph, folded into a square no bigger than a stamp, was a note written in crayon. It said, "Mommy, come back before I count to 1,000,000. I am on 7,042." The bodega sat on the corner of Maddox and Vine in a part of the city called Greenwich Row. It was the kind of neighborhood that city maps showed but city budgets forgot. The awning above the entrance had torn sometime last winter and no one had replaced it, so the green canvas hung in two uneven flaps that slapped against the brick whenever the wind picked up. The front window displayed a wall of faded lottery posters and a neon sign that read, "Open," in letters that flickered every few seconds as though the sign itself was unsure. Inside, the linoleum floor had been mopped so many times with the same gray water that it had taken on a permanent dullness, like a mirror that had given up on reflecting. The shelves were stocked unevenly. Canned goods on one side, bread and chips on the other, a small cooler in the back, humming at a pitch that suggested it was one summer away from quitting entirely. The fluorescent light above the counter gave everything a bluish cast, making people look more tired than they already were. There was a bell above the door, but it had rusted in place and no longer rang. People came and went without announcement, like ghosts passing through a room that had forgotten how to notice them. Outside, the street was wet from an earlier rain that had left shallow puddles along the gutter. Across the road, a laundromat with a hand-painted sign glowed yellow through its steamed windows. Next to it, a barber shop that closed at 5, but left its pole spinning into the night, red and white and blue, turning slowly in the dark like a lighthouse for a shore no one was trying to reach. Greenwich Row had once been a neighborhood where families walked to church on Sunday mornings, and children played between parked cars until their mothers called them inside. That was 20 years ago. Now it was a place where people kept their heads down and their doors locked and their expectations at a level that could not be disappointed. A place where trouble did not visit because trouble had moved in and never left. Her name was Sable Rennick. She was 33 years old. She had not slept more than 4 hours in any single stretch for the past 19 days. Her dark auburn hair was pulled back into a knot, held by a single bobby pin she had found on the floor of a gas station restroom in Delaware, and her jacket, a canvas field coat 2 sizes too large, had been donated to her from a bin outside a church in a town she could not remember the name of because the last 19 days had blurred into a single unbroken corridor of motion and fear and the quiet, grinding arithmetic of survival. She had $42 left. 19 days ago, she had 187. The money had disappeared the way it always does when you are running. Gas. Food. A motel room on the third night because the temperature had dropped below freezing, and she could not stop shaking long enough to drive. Medication she had bought and mailed to her sister in Oris County, 200 miles south, because that was where her daughter was. That was where Brecky was. Brecky was 4. She had been diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia 11 months ago. She had lost her hair by month 3. She had lost 9 pounds by month 5. She had not lost her habit of counting everything she saw: birds outside the hospital window, ceiling tiles above her bed. the number of steps from the nurse's station to her room, which was 31. She counted because counting was the one thing in her world that still followed rules. Numbers did not change their minds. Numbers did not leave. Sable had left. Not because she wanted to, because Brecky's treatment cost more than insurance would cover, and the bills had become a wall she could not climb and could not go around. The copays. The medications not covered under the plan. The specialized nutritional supplements Brecky needed because the chemotherapy had destroyed her appetite and her stomach lining and her ability to eat anything that was not carefully engineered to slip past a body that was fighting itself on every front. Sable had worked 2 jobs, a medical billing clerk during the day, a night stalker at a warehouse distribution center from 11 at night until 4 in the morning. She slept in the gap between them, 90 minutes in the parking lot of the warehouse with her seat reclined and her phone alarm set, and her coat folded against the window as a pillow. 7 months she had done that. She had kept Brecky's treatment funded. She had kept the lights on. She had kept everything running with a desperate, invisible endurance that no one notices until it stops. And then the warehouse had closed. Not downsized. Closed. Locks on the doors, a memo taped to the window, severance checks that bounced on the second try. Half of Sable's income vanished in a single week. She had tried to find another job. 14 applications in 9 days. But employers did not return calls quickly when your resume had a gap shaped like 11 months of hospital visits, and an exhaustion that leaves marks under your eyes that no amount of concealer can hide. The medical bills had not stopped. Brecky's blood counts had not stopped needing to be monitored every 72 hours. And when the insurance company sent a letter saying they were reviewing Brecky's coverage due to what they called a utilization threshold, Sable had sat on the kitchen floor at 2 in the morning and read the letter 3 times and understood for the first time that the system she had trusted to help her daughter was now the thing standing between her daughter and survival. That was when Marit had called. Marit was Sable's older sister. She lived in Oris County in a rented duplex with a backyard and a dog named Punch, and the kind of steady, quiet life that Sable had once imagined for herself. Marit had said, "Bring Brecky to me. I will take care of her while you figure this out. You are no good to her if you collapse." Sable had resisted for 6 days. Then she had driven Brecky to Merritt's house on a Tuesday afternoon, carried her inside, set her down on the couch, and kissed her forehead 4 times because Brecky liked even numbers. She had told Brecky she was going on a trip to find something important. Brecky had asked, "How long?" Sable had said, "Not long." Brecky had looked at her with eyes that understood more than a 4-year-old's eyes should and said, "I will count until you come back." That had been 19 days ago. Sable had driven north because north was where the jobs were, where a woman with a billing certification and a willingness to work any shift at any hour might find something fast enough to keep her daughter's treatment from being interrupted. She had found nothing. She had spent money she did not have on gas and food, and one desperate night in a motel where she had called Marette and listened to Brecky count to her on the phone. 7,042, Mommy. That is where I am. And Sable had pressed her hand against her mouth and held the phone away from her face so her daughter would not hear her cry. Now she was standing in a bodega in Greenwich Row, buying a bottle of water and a bag of rice because that was what $42 could afford. And a man she had never seen before had taken her wallet out of her hands like it was nothing. Like she was nothing. Sable did not turn around when the wallet left her hand. She did not gasp or shout or reach for it. She went still. She lowered her eyes. She waited for it to be over. This was not courage. It was not submission. It was the survival reflex of a woman who had spent the past year learning that the world would take whatever it wanted from her, and that fighting back cost more energy than she had left to spend. A year ago, Sable Rennick had been a person with a plan, an apartment with a lease, a job with a direct deposit, a daughter who went to preschool 3 mornings a week and came home with glitter on her hands, and stories about a boy named Caius who ate crayons. A life that was not extraordinary but was hers, held together by the ordinary architecture of work and routine, and the small, sustaining belief that if you kept showing up, things would hold. Then the blood work came back wrong. The pediatrician had called on a Thursday. Sable remembered the day because she had just bought Brecky a pair of rain boots with ladybugs on them, and Brecky had insisted on wearing them inside the apartment, stomping through every room as though she were walking through puddles that only she could see. The phone had rung, and the doctor had said words that Sable heard individually, but could not assemble into a sentence that made sense. White blood cell count. Abnormal. Referral. Oncology. The first 3 months of treatment had eaten through her savings, her credit, and the $4,000 emergency fund she had been building since Brecky was born. By month 4, she was selling the television, the microwave, a winter coat that still had the tags on it, meeting strangers in parking lots, handing over pieces of her life in exchange for bills she folded into her wallet next to the photograph of Brecky. By month 6, she had taken the warehouse job. By month 8, she had stopped eating breakfast, not as a decision but as an erosion so gradual she did not notice until she realized she had not sat down for a morning meal in 6 weeks. By month 10, the warehouse closed. The insurance letter arrived, and the ground she had been standing on finally gave way entirely. Marette had caught her. That was the truth Sable could not say aloud because saying it meant admitting she had been falling, and admitting that meant admitting that the thing she feared most had already happened. She had failed to hold the line. Brecky was in Oris County. Brecky was safe. Brecky was counting. And Sable was in a bodega in Greenock Row, watching a man in a heavy coat open her wallet and find the only 2 things inside it that mattered. The man holding the wallet had not expected silence. He had expected a reaction, a yelp, a grab, a stammered plea. That was how it usually went. The petty cruelties he performed daily were designed to produce a response, and the response was the point. The taking was never about the object. It was about the flinch. But this woman did not flinch. She stood with her hands at her sides and her eyes on the counter and her mouth pressed into a line so thin it looked like it had been drawn with a pencil. And her stillness did something that flinching never could. It made the room uncomfortable. The 2 men behind him, Kettner and DeVos, had been laughing. They stopped. Not because they had been told to, but because the joke had landed in a room where no one was playing along, and laughter without an audience becomes a sound that embarrasses the person making it. He looked down at what he was holding. It was not leather. It was a nylon bifold, the kind you could buy at a gas station for $6, with a Velcro closure worn down to the point where it barely held. It was the wallet of a person who had already sold everything worth selling. He opened it. A few bills, a 20, a 10, a 5, 2 ones. Behind them, tucked into the clear plastic window where a license should have been, was a photograph. Small, printed on regular paper, the kind of print you get from a pharmacy kiosk for 39 cents. A girl, 4, maybe 5 years old, sitting in a hospital bed wearing a gown too big for her, the neckline sliding off one shoulder. Her head was bare, no hair, not a strand. She was smiling, wide and unguarded, and she was holding up 2 fingers in a peace sign. Behind the photograph, folded into a square so small it had clearly been opened and refolded hundreds of times, was a piece of paper. He unfolded it. Lined, torn from a notebook, written in purple crayon. The letters were uneven, some capitalized and some not. Written by a hand still learning to make words stay inside the lines. Mommy, come back before I count to 1,000,000. I am on 7,042. He read it twice. The bodega was quiet. The man behind the register, An older man with a gray mustache and a newspaper folded under his arm stood very still, watching something he could not stop, but also could not look away from. He looked at the woman. She had not moved. Her hand was still extended, the $5 bill held between her fingers. Her arm was trembling from an exhaustion that lives in the muscles long after the mind has stopped registering it. He looked at the note again, at the purple crayon, at the number. And something in his chest tightened in a way he did not recognize. Not the way it tightened before violence or during a negotiation, it tightened the way a fist tightens around something it is afraid to drop. "Whose kid?" he asked. His voice came out quieter than he intended, as if the question had bypassed whatever part of him controlled the performance of being who he was. Sable did not look at him. "Mine." "She sick?" Sable's jaw moved, the small involuntary clench of a person holding back something that wants out. "Give me my wallet back, please." He looked at Kettner and DeVos. They were watching him. They did not know what to do with their faces because the script had changed, and no one had given them the new lines. He folded the note. He slid it behind the photograph. He closed the wallet. And then he set it down on the counter beside her hand. Gently. Not tossed. Not dropped. Placed, with a care that surprised even him. His name was Calder Moan. He was 57 years old. He had a scar across the bridge of his nose from a fight in 1991 that he had won in a way that made sure no one in Greenock Row ever started another one. He had iron gray hair cropped close to the scalp, and hands that were large and square, and had done things he did not discuss in rooms where the walls were thin. He ran an operation that stretched from the southern waterfront to the rail yards north of Barrack Avenue. He employed 160 men. He had a lawyer named Pender who played golf with 2 circuit court judges, and a city alderman who owed Calder a favor he would never be asked to repay, because the favor itself was the leash. He spoke quietly because he could afford to. People leaned in when Calder Moan talked, not because his voice was soft, but because missing a word from his mouth could be the kind of mistake that had consequences. But none of that was what stopped him in the bodega. What stopped him was the number 7042. Because Calder Moan had once been a boy who sat in the hallway of Renwick Memorial Hospital, counting the tiles on the floor while his mother received her 3rd round of chemotherapy. He had been 9. He had counted tiles, then ceiling panels, then the steps between the elevator and his mother's room, which was 44. He had counted because if he was counting, he was not thinking about the thing the doctors had said, which was that his mother's cancer had metastasized, and the treatment was no longer curative. It was palliative. He had not known what palliative meant. He had looked it up in the dictionary in the hospital's family waiting room. The definition had used the word comfort, and he had understood, even at 9, that when doctors used the word comfort, they meant the opposite. His mother's name had been Evadne. She had been a seamstress who worked out of the back room of a dry cleaner on Callis Street, hemming trousers and taking in dresses and repairing zippers for people who could not afford new clothes. She had hands that were always moving, always fixing, and always mending something that someone else had torn. She had died on a Wednesday in March when Calder was 11. She had weighed 89 pounds at the end. Her hair had been gone for months. Her voice had been gone for weeks. But the last thing she had done with her hands was to hold up 2 fingers, a peace sign, the same one she had made in every photograph since he was a baby, her signature, her small private joke, her way of saying, "We are still here and we are still okay." The girl in the photograph in the wallet had been making the same sign. Calder had not thought about his mother's hands in years. He had buried that memory so deep inside himself that finding it now felt like stepping on a nail in a dark room. Sudden, sharp, and impossible to ignore. He looked at the woman whose wallet he had just returned, at the trembling in her arm, at the $5 bill extended toward the register, at the jacket that did not fit her, and the shadows under her eyes, shadows left by weeks of something he recognized because he had watched it consume his mother from the inside out. Not the disease itself, but the cost of fighting it alone. Kettner shifted behind him. "Boss, we should head out. DeVos has the barrack thing at 8. Calder did not move. "Go," he said. "Both of you, go. Take the car. I will call when I need you." Kettner looked at DeVos. DeVos looked at the floor. Neither argued. They left without a word, the door swinging shut behind them, the broken bell offering no sound to mark their exit. The bodega was quiet again. Sable had not moved. The $5 bill was still in her hand. Calder stood 3 feet behind her. He did not step closer. Then he spoke. "The girl in the picture. She is counting." Sable's shoulders tightened. She did not turn. "I do not know what you are talking about." "The note. Purple crayon. She is counting until you come back." Sable turned slowly. Her eyes met his for the first time. They were brown and dry and had the flat, depthless quality of someone who had cried so many times that the mechanism had simply worn out. "You read that?" Her voice was not a question. "Yes?" "You had no right." "No, I did not." The honesty stopped her. She had been preparing for a fight, for a justification, for the kind of excuse men give when they take something that does not belong to them. She had not been preparing for agreement. "Why do you care?" she asked. Calder looked at the wallet on the counter, at the photograph barely visible through the plastic window. "Because I used to count too," he said, "and nobody came back." The sentence landed in the bodega like a stone dropped into still water. The man behind the register quietly set down his newspaper and looked away, giving this moment the only thing a stranger can give: privacy. Sable studied Calder's face. She was good at reading men. Months of hospitals and billing offices and insurance representatives had made her fluent in the grammar of male authority. She searched his face for the familiar architecture of self-interest. She did not find it. What she found was a man whose jaw was set hard enough to crack a walnut, whose hands hung at his sides in loose fists, and whose eyes, iron gray and unblinking, held the unmistakable residue of a grief so old it had fossilized. She did not trust him, but she recognized him. And in Sable Rennick's world, recognition was worth more than trust, because trust could be manufactured. Recognition could not. Calder spoke first. "When did you eat last?" Sable's chin lifted. "I am fine." The words came out automatic, mechanical, pulled from the same place all such lies are stored, the place where mothers keep the phrases that protect their children from knowing how bad things really are. "I am fine. We are okay. Everything is going to work out." Calder heard the lie instantly, because his mother had said the same words in the same voice with the same hollow steadiness every time a neighbor asked how she was doing. "Fine. We are fine." 3 words that meant the opposite of themselves so consistently that Calder had come to understand, even as a boy, that fine was not a feeling. It was a door people closed when they did not want you to see what was on the other side. "There is a place around the corner," he said. "Pilsons. They make soup that is actually soup, not water with ambition. I would like to buy you something to eat." "I do not take things from strangers." "You are not taking. I am offering. The difference matters." Sable looked at him. 5 seconds was usually enough to determine whether a man's kindness was kindness or a down payment on something he expected to collect later. 5 seconds passed. She could not read him. Most men were legible, but this man's eyes were a locked room. "Just soup," she said. "Just soup." She picked up her wallet and held it against her stomach, the way you hold something that contains the only proof that your life is real. They walked. Calder went first, 3 steps ahead, making it clear that Sable could stop following at any time. The street was dark now. The rain had returned, a fine mist that hung in the air like a curtain too thin to see, but too present to ignore. Pilson's was a narrow restaurant wedged between a pawn shop and a tax preparation office that had been closed for 2 years. Inside, the air smelled like bread and onions and the particular warmth that comes from a kitchen that has been cooking the same food for decades. 8 tables covered in checkered vinyl cloth. A chalkboard menu with prices written in a hand that pressed too hard on certain letters, making the sixes look like eights and the fives look like sixes. Calder pointed to a table by the wall, a place where a person could sit with their back to the corner. He did not sit in that chair. He let Sable take it. He sat across from her, his back to the room. It was a small thing, but Sable noticed. Men who wanted control always took the chair that faced the door. This man had given it to her. A waitress came, silver hair pinned up, pencil behind her ear. Calder moan in my restaurant on a Tuesday night. You lost or hungry? Both. 2 bowls of the potato soup. Bread. Whatever pie you have. Cherry. Then cherry. The waitress looked at Sable. Her eyes did the thing certain women's eyes do when they see another woman in trouble. She said nothing about any of it. She simply said, You want coffee, sweetheart? It is fresh. Sable nodded. The word sweetheart had cracked something in her. Not the word itself, but how it was said. One woman to another. I see you and I am not going to make a thing of it. The coffee came. Sable wrapped both hands around the mug and held it without drinking, absorbing the heat through her palms. Calder said nothing. He understood that silence, when offered without impatience, becomes a room. And sometimes people who have been locked out of every other room will walk into that one if you hold the door open long enough. The soup arrived. Potato and leek with flecks of thyme. The bread was dark, dense, sliced thick. Sable ate slowly, not because she was not hungry, but because her body had learned to treat food as a negotiation. Eat too fast and the stomach revolts. Eat too much and the guilt arrives. The voice that says this money should have gone toward medication, toward the copay that is due on Friday. Calder ate without ceremony. He did not watch her. He simply occupied his side of the table, present, unhurried. It was Sable who broke the silence. Not because he asked, because the warmth of the soup and the coffee and the strange, disorienting safety of sitting with her back to a wall in a room where no one was looking at her with pity had opened something she had been keeping shut since she left Oris County. Her name is Brecky, she said. Calder looked up from his bowl. She is 4. She has leukemia. Acute lymphoblastic. She has been in treatment for almost a year. Sable's voice was steady the way a bridge is steady, trembling under the load but refusing to give. She counts everything, tiles, steps, birds. She told me once that if she counts high enough, she can make things stay. I asked her what she meant. She said, if I am still counting, then nothing is over yet. Calder set down his spoon. She is with my sister right now, 200 miles south. My sister Marit. Marit has a house and a dog and a yard and all the things I was supposed to give Brecky and could not. Sable's hand tightened around the coffee mug. I drove north to find work. I have a medical billing certification. I can code claims, file authorizations, negotiate with insurance adjusters who are trained to say no 17 different ways. But none of it matters if no one will hire me because I look like this. She gestured at herself. The oversized jacket, the hollow cheeks, the dark circles that lived under her eyes like permanent residents. I had one interview, 9 days ago, an outpatient clinic in Barrack Heights. The office manager looked at me and I could see her decide in the first 4 seconds that I was not the kind of person she wanted at her front desk. She said she would call me. She did not call me. Sable tore a small piece of bread and held it without eating it. Brecky's insurance sent a letter. They are reviewing her coverage. If they drop her, the treatment stops. If the treatment stops, her white blood cell count will spike within 2 weeks. If the count spikes, she relapses. If she relapses, the survival window drops from 85% to 40. I know the name of every drug she takes. I know the mechanism by which methotrexate inhibits dihydrofolate reductase. I know what a lumbar puncture feels like because I held her hand through 3 of them and she told me it feels like someone pushing a cold finger into your spine, and I have never forgotten those words, and I will never forget them for as long as I live. Her voice did not crack. It remained level, controlled, precise. And that was what made it devastating. Not the emotion, but the absence of it. The clinical steadiness of a woman who had converted all of her grief into data because data did not collapse. Data did not sob in restaurant bathrooms at 2 in the morning. Data kept moving forward. I have $42. I need $3,000 to cover the next 60 days of treatment while I fight the insurance appeal. I do not have $300. I have $42 and a wallet with a photograph and a note in purple crayon, and I am standing in a city where I know no one, and the only thing keeping me upright is the fact that somewhere in Oris County, a 4-year-old girl is counting to 1 million because she believes that when she gets there, her mother will walk through the door. She set the bread down. She looked at Calder directly. I am not asking you for anything. I just needed someone to hear it. Because if I hold it alone for one more day, I am going to break. And if I break, she does not get to 1 million. And she has to get to 1 million. She has to. The restaurant was quiet. The chalkboard menu, the checkered vinyl, the cherry pie cooling on the counter. The waitress standing near the kitchen door, her hand pressed flat against her own chest without realizing it. Calder sat very still. His jaw was working, the muscles along the sides of his face moving in the slow, rhythmic clench of a person processing something that does not fit inside the container they have built for the world. He thought about his mother, about the seamstress with the busy hands who had died weighing 89 pounds. He thought about the hospital hallway and the tiles he had counted, 112 from the elevator to her room. He thought about the peace sign, the last gesture she had ever made. He thought about the fact that nobody had helped her. Neighbors had known. The women at the dry cleaner had known. And nobody had done a single thing because helping costs something and looking away is free. He looked at the wallet on the table, at the photograph visible through the plastic window. A bald girl, 2 fingers, counting. What is the attorney's name? He asked. What? The attorney handling the insurance appeal. I do not have an attorney. I have been trying to handle it myself. Then you need one. I cannot afford one. I did not ask if you could afford one. Calder pulled his phone from his coat pocket and dialed a number without looking at the screen. A voice answered, clipped and professional. Veridine. It is Calder. What do you need? Health insurance denial, pediatric oncology, acute lymphoblastic leukemia. The carrier is threatening to drop coverage mid-treatment. The patient is 4 years old. A pause. Where is the patient being treated? Calder looked at Sable. She answered the question she had not been asked directly. Oris County Medical Center. Dr. Nasrin Peak. Pediatric oncology, 3rd floor. Calder repeated it into the phone. I can file an emergency appeal by Thursday, the voice said. I need the denial letter, the treatment plan, and any documentation of medical necessity. I have the denial letter, Sable said. The treatment plan is on file at the hospital. She will provide it if I ask, the voice said. Doctors respond differently to attorneys with subpoena authority. Send me what you have tonight. Calder said. One more thing. She needs placement, a room. Something clean, safe, with a door that locks. Tonight. I will call the Harwell Foundation. I sit on their board. I can have a unit opened within the hour. Do it. He hung up. Sable was staring at him with an expression that did not exist in his usual catalog. Not gratitude, not suspicion. The face of a woman who had been treading water for so long that someone throwing her a rope felt more frightening than the drowning, because drowning was familiar, and the rope meant something she had trained herself not to feel. Hope. Who was that? Odessa Varadine, healthcare attorney, insurance disputes and patient advocacy. She has argued before the state Supreme Court twice and won both times. She does not lose coverage cases. I cannot pay her. She is not billing you. Everyone bills. Not everyone. Calder folded his hands on the table. Odessa does this because 22 years ago, her own son was denied a bone marrow transplant by an insurance company that decided he was not worth the cost. She fought that denial alone. Her son survived. She became an attorney because she decided no other mother should have to fight that fight without representation. Why are you doing this? Sable asked. You took my wallet 20 minutes ago. You stole from me for a joke. And now you are making phone calls like you are trying to save my daughter's life. Those two things do not go together. No, Calder said. They do not. He did not explain further, because the truth was that it was not coherent. The man who had taken the wallet and the man making phone calls were not the same man, and yet they were. And the distance between them was exactly the width of a photograph of a bald girl holding up two fingers. My mother was sick, Calder said. When I was a boy. She had cancer. She could not afford the treatment. She worked 2 jobs and sold her sewing machine and ate nothing so I could eat something. And she died. Not because the disease killed her, but because the cost of fighting it used up everything she had. He looked at the window. The rain was heavier now. The glass was streaked with it. I was 11 when she died. I was in the room. She was so small by the end, and the last thing she did was hold up 2 fingers. He paused. The same sign your daughter is making in that photograph. Sable pressed her hand against her wallet. I have spent my whole life building something. I have money. I have influence. And in all that time, I have never once used any of it for anything that my mother would have recognized as good. Until right now. The waitress brought the cherry pie. Neither of them touched it for a long time. Odessa Varadine worked without pause, without negotiation, and with a directional clarity that made resistance feel not just futile, but illogical. By Thursday morning, she had filed an emergency appeal with the State Insurance Commission. 47 pages. Brecky's complete treatment history, Dr. Peake's recommendation for continued care, 3 peer-reviewed studies on survival outcomes of children whose leukemia treatment was interrupted, and a 7-page legal brief arguing that the utilization threshold review constituted a de facto denial of care to a minor in active treatment, violating 4 provisions of the state's patient protection statute. The insurance company responded within 72 hours, not because the filing compelled them to, but because Odessa Varadine's name on a filing had the same effect as a weather warning on a coastal town. You could ignore it, but only if you were willing to accept what came next. They assigned a physician reviewer, Dr. Garrett Innes, to reassess the case. He worked on contract, reviewing charts remotely, without examining patients or speaking to their families. He issued 312 discontinuation recommendations in the previous fiscal year. His approval rate for continued coverage was 11%. Odessa expected this. She had faced him before. She called Dr. Peake. I need a clinical rebuttal. Detailed, current, impossible to dismiss. Cite the 2023 Kessler-Braun study and the 2024 Haverford Protocol revision. Include Brecky's most recent blood work. Dr. Peake had it to her by Saturday afternoon. The rebuttal was devastating in its precision. Every treatment cycle documented. Every response marker cataloged. Brecky's white blood cell trajectory showing a steady decline in leukemic cells over 9 months of consistent treatment. Projections using the insurance company's own clinical models turned against them. proving by their own metrics that discontinuation would result in relapse, with a probability of 91%. Odessa submitted the rebuttal on Monday with a cover letter that said, in language polite in the way a scalpel is polite, that if the company proceeded with the denial, she would file complaints with the State Attorney General, the Department of Insurance, and the Federal Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and pursue a civil action for bad faith denial of coverage to a minor in active oncological treatment. The insurance company reversed the denial on Wednesday. 3 paragraphs. Upon further review, twice. In the best interest of the patient, once. No apology. Insurance companies do not apologize, but it reinstated coverage retroactively and authorized 18 months of continuous treatment without further review. Odessa called Sable that evening. Sable answered on the first ring. It is done. Coverage is reinstated, 18 months. Dr. Peak has been notified. Brecky's next treatment cycle proceeds on schedule. Sable sat on the floor of her room at the Harwell Foundation. A clean room, a single bed, a nightstand, a window looking onto a shared garden where someone had planted marigolds. The door had a lock that worked. She had tested it 9 times the first night. Say it again, Sable whispered. Coverage is reinstated, 18 months. Your daughter's treatment continues. Sable pressed the phone against her forehead and cried. Not the quiet, controlled tears she had been holding for weeks. Real tears. A release so total it left the air trembling afterward. She cried for Brecky. She cried for herself. She cried for every night in the car, in the motel, on the kitchen floor reading a letter that told her that her daughter's life had a price, and she could not afford it. Then she picked up the phone and called Marette. Put her on. Rustling, a dog barking, Marette's voice saying, Brecky, Mommy is on the phone. Then a small voice, clear, bright, unbothered by the weight of the world it had been born into. Mommy, I am on 41,309. Sable laughed. It came out broken and wet and wonderful. That is so many. I am fast. You are the fastest. Are you coming back? Soon, baby. So soon. Mommy? Yes. I love you more than all the numbers. Sable closed her eyes. She held the phone with both hands. I love you more than all the numbers, too. 3 weeks later, Sable drove south. The car had been serviced at a garage in Greenock Row by a mechanic named Preston, who had been told by someone he did not name that the brakes and oil needed attention and that the bill had already been taken care of. Preston had not asked questions. He had done the work and left a small air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror that smelled like pine, which was not something anyone had asked for, but which he did anyway, because the car looked like it needed something kind. She arrived at Marette's duplex at 4:17 in the afternoon. The sun was low and orange behind the tree line, and Punch was barking before she had even turned off the engine. Marette came out the front door, arms crossed, chin doing the thing it did when she was trying not to cry. Sisters know each other's faces the way musicians know their instruments. Every vibration, every note the other person is trying not to play. They hugged long enough for both of them to stop pretending they were okay. She is in the living room, Marette said. She has been counting out loud all day. She is driving Punch insane. The living room was small, warm, cluttered with the evidence of a child in temporary residence. Crayons on the coffee table. A blanket fort between the couch and the bookshelf. A stuffed elephant named Portho that Brecky had acquired and now considered essential to survival. Brecky was on the couch. Pajamas with small blue rockets. No hair. Her eyes were enormous in her face, dark and round. She was counting. 62,400 and... She stopped. She looked at the doorway. Mommy. The word was not shouted. It was said the way a person says a word they have been holding in their mouth for so long that releasing it feels like exhaling after being underwater. quiet, reverent, total. Sable crossed the room and dropped to her knees and took her daughter into her arms with a fierceness that was not about strength, but about completion. The circuit that had been broken was closed. The counting could stop. I am on 62,417, Brecky said, her voice muffled against Sable's shoulder. That is so many, baby. I would have kept going. I know. I would have gone to 1,000,000. I know you would have. Brecky pulled back and studied Sable's face with the analytical precision of a child who had learned that details are how you know if something is real. Did you find the important thing? Sable thought about a bodega on the corner of Maddox and Vine, a wallet lifted from her hand. A man reading a note in purple crayon. Soup and bread at a checkered table. A woman named Odessa whose son had survived. A lock on a door that worked every time she tested it. Yes, Sable said. I found it. Brecky held up 2 fingers. A peace sign, the same one she had made in the photograph. The same one a woman named Evadne had made in a hospital bed 42 years before Brecky was born. Sable held up 2 fingers back, and in the living room of a duplex in Oris County, with a dog barking in the yard and a blanket fort sagging between the couch and the bookshelf, and a stuffed elephant named Portho watching from the cushions, a mother and her daughter sat together and did not count anything at all. 6 months later, Sable sat in the waiting room of Oris County Medical Center. Brecky was behind the door at the end of the hallway, where Dr. Peak was reviewing her most recent blood work. Dr. Peak had called that morning and said, "Come in today. I want to go over the numbers with you in person." She had not said whether the news was good or bad. Sable sat with her hands folded in her lap. She was wearing clothes that fit. A navy blouse from a consignment shop, dark trousers, shoes with laces that matched. Her hair was clean, cut shorter, tucked behind her ears. She had gained back 7 pounds. She had a job at a rural health clinic 12 minutes from Moret's duplex, processing claims and filing authorizations, translating the brutal language of insurance bureaucracy into outcomes that kept people covered. She had moved into a small rental house at the edge of town. 2 bedrooms, a gas stove, a backyard with a fence that Brecky had asked to paint. They had painted it green because green was Brecky's favorite color this month. Last month, it had been purple. Brecky changed favorite colors the way other children changed shoes, frequently, enthusiastically, and without apology. The door opened. Dr. Peak came out. Tall black hair streaked with silver, a calm expression that gave nothing away until she was ready to give everything away. She sat down beside Sable. The numbers are good. Sable did not move. Her white blood cell count is within normal range for the first time since diagnosis. The leukemic cell markers are undetectable. She is in remission, Sable. Full remission. Sable pressed her hands against her face. She did not cry. She had cried enough. What she did instead was laugh. A single startled laugh that came from somewhere so deep inside her that it surprised her. She sat very still and let the sentence rewrite everything. Full remission. 2 words. 11 letters. The entire world. She walked down the hallway and opened the door, and Brecky was sitting on the examination table swinging her legs and counting ceiling tiles. She had fuzz on her head now, the earliest suggestion of hair growing back, dark and soft, like the down on a newborn bird. 27, Brecky said, pointing up. There are 27 tiles. Mommy, am I done? Dr. Peak gave a small nod. You are done, baby. Brecky looked at the ceiling. She looked at her mother. She looked at her own hands, small and thin, the veins still visible from months of blood draws. Then I do not have to count anymore? The question was not about tiles. It was about the months of needles and nausea and night sweats, and the morning when she woke up, and her hair was on the pillow instead of her head. About counting to 1,000,000, while her mother drove north into a future neither of them could see. About being 4 years old and understanding that the world is not permanent, and that counting is the only spell you have against the unbearable possibility that the people you love might not come back. You do not have to count anymore, Sable said. Brecky held up 2 fingers. Peace sign. Sable held up 2. And somewhere in Greenock Row, a man in a heavy coat sat in the back booth of a narrow restaurant called Pilson's, eating potato soup alone. His phone was on the table. On the screen was a message from a number he had saved, but never named. No words. Just a photograph. 2 hands, one large and one very small, each holding up 2 fingers. Caldermone looked at the photograph for a long time. The waitress refilled his coffee without being asked. The chalkboard menu still had 5s that looked like 6s. The rain outside was the same rain that always fell on Greenock Row, steady, gray, indifferent to the people beneath it. He closed the phone. He picked up his spoon. He ate his soup. And for the first time in 46 years, the boy who had counted tiles in a hospital hallway, who had watched his mother hold up 2 fingers for the last time, who had built an empire on the quiet foundation of a grief he had never spoken aloud, felt something shift inside the walled-off hallway of his chest. Not a collapse, not an opening, something smaller. Something like a crack through which light, thin and cautious and entirely unexpected, had begun to find its way in. He did not name it. Men like Calder did not name such things. But if he had, the word would have been the same one a 4-year-old girl had written in purple crayon on a piece of notebook paper and folded into a square no bigger than a stamp. It would have been the word that means, I am still here, and you came back, and the counting is over. It would have been enough. Outside, the rain continued. The neon sign in the bodega window flickered its uncertain open. The barber pole turned in the dark, and somewhere south, in a house with a green fence and a gas stove and a backyard clothesline where small pajamas with blue rockets dried in the afternoon sun, a 4-year-old girl with fuzz on her head and enormous dark eyes sat at a kitchen table eating a bowl of cereal and not counting a single thing. Not one. Not